It was the kind of summer morning that made the asphalt ripple under your boots and turned old parking lots into frying pans. In the sleepy outskirts of Millersville, Tennessee, the local gas station hadn't seen excitement in years, unless you counted dogs getting loose or Mrs. Cotter complaining about skateboarders. At pump number 4, beneath a faded Texaco sign that swayed in the breeze like a tired old flag, sat a rusted-out 1971 Chevy pickup. Its paint, once deep red, had long faded to something between dried blood and oxidized iron. The body was scarred with deep dents, the kind you don't get from careless parking, but from long roads, hard work, and harder times. The truck was still. So was the man inside it. Across the lot, leaning against the hood of a Carter County Sheriff's cruiser, Deputy Nick Harlan sipped lukewarm coffee and watched with amused contempt. "You see that antique?" he said, nodding toward the truck. "Looks like it's held together with hope and rust." Deputy Melissa Ray didn't look up from her phone. "Bet it leaks more oil than it drinks gas." They both laughed. But they weren't really looking. If they had, they might have seen the man in the driver's seat. Tall and wiry despite his years, his frame was all angles and quiet strength. His coat, an old Army field jacket, was clean but faded, worn thin at the elbows. A tan ball cap shaded his eyes, but the silver-gray hair beneath it was neatly trimmed, the kind you'd expect from someone who still believed in standards, even if no one else did. His hands were thick with old calluses and crisscrossed with scars, hands that had gripped more than steering wheels in their lifetime. And his eyes, if they'd bothered to notice, were calm, impossibly deep, and older than his years. The kind of eyes that had seen things most people couldn't carry. But Nick and Melissa didn't notice. They saw a beat-up truck, they saw an old man, and they thought they understood. "Hey, Gramps," Nick called, just loud enough to carry across the heat-warped air. "You parking that relic here permanently, or just lost your museum tag?" Melissa smirked without lifting her gaze. "Looks like he's waiting for his Social Security check, or a tow truck." She raised her phone, snapped a photo, and snorted. "This is going straight to the group chat." The old man didn't move, just stared out toward the horizon, where a thin ribbon of dust was climbing into the sky like a signal flare. He watched it the way some men watch a fuse burning, steady, quiet, like he already knew what was coming. Then the sound came. A low, smooth hum, too smooth to be local. A black SUV emerged from the heat shimmer, moving fast but steady down the highway. Government plates, tinted windows so dark they looked like mirrors. It pulled into the lot and rolled to a stop behind the old Chevy. The engine went silent, and so did everything else. Melissa's phone buzzed in her hand. She glanced at the screen, her brow tightening. "Nick." "What?" She turned the screen toward him. A dispatch alert blinked in red. "Secret Service detail incoming. Do not engage. Repeat, do not engage." The shift in energy was instant. The man in the Chevy finally turned his head, slowly, deliberately. His gaze locked with Nick's, and for a second, something old and sharp passed between them. Then the SUV door opened. A tall man in a navy suit stepped out. His shoes were polished like mirrors, and his posture was military. Spine straight, steps precise, every movement deliberate. A black earpiece coiled around his ear like a warning. He didn't speak right away, just looked at the deputies, taking them in the way a hawk studies prey. Then, calm as still water, he said, "Deputies, stand down." Nick straightened, defensive. "This is Carter County." The agent flipped open his badge. The sun caught the gold just right. "I can," he said, "and I will. That man is under federal protection." Nick Harlan's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The badge gleaming in the agent's hand had the kind of weight no small-town deputy could argue with. The man holding it wasn't just another suit. He moved like someone trained to eliminate threats before they even happened. Melissa Ray lowered her phone, fingers twitching. Her earlier smugness dissolved as quickly as the humor had vanished from Nick's face. The man in the old truck didn't say a word. He hadn't so much as flinched when the SUV rolled in or when the agent stepped out. His eyes returned to the horizon. The dust cloud had disappeared, but he was still watching like it hadn't. Another man emerged from the back of the SUV, older, maybe mid-50s, with gray edging into his temples and a quiet readiness in the way he stood. He carried something, a small, polished wooden box cradled in both hands like it held more than wood and velvet. He approached the truck with the reverence of a man laying flowers on a grave. "Staff Sergeant Daniels," he said, voice steady as the road beneath their feet. "General Harris sends his regards. He wanted to be here himself, but duties got him pinned down. He asked me to deliver this, personally." The old man's name hung in the air like dust caught in morning light. Daniels. Not Grandpa. Not Hey Old Man. Not the punchline of a joke. Staff Sergeant Daniels. He turned his head and met the man's eyes. Slowly, his hands came off the wheel. They trembled, not with fear, but with weight, age, memory. He reached out and accepted the box like it might crumble if mishandled. Inside, nestled in black velvet, was a coin. Heavy, gleaming, etched with the seal of the United States and a phrase in Latin no one remembered how to translate anymore. A challenge coin. No bigger than a silver dollar. But Daniels held it like it was forged from stone. Nick stared. He'd seen challenge coins before, in movies, maybe a documentary once, but nothing like this. Nothing so quiet, so deeply personal. Melissa's mouth parted. "Wait," she whispered, as if too loud a sound might break the moment. That's not just some souvenir." The agent nodded once. "This isn't for decoration. That man is a Medal of Honor recipient." Silence fell over the gas station again, thick and full of static. Nick felt it in his chest, a tightening. Not just from shame, though there was plenty of that, but awe too. Because in that moment, he understood. This wasn't just an old man with a truck. This was someone who had bled for the country he wore on his sleeve. Daniels looked at him then. Not with anger, not with bitterness, but with something heavier. "You never asked," he said, voice worn like river rock but carrying. "That's the problem. People don't ask anymore. They just assume." His words hit like stones in a still pond. The ripples moved through Nick, through Melissa, and out toward the young gas station clerk behind the bulletproof glass, frozen mid-shift, jaw slack with realization. The older agent stepped forward, still holding the box's lid open, as Daniels stared at the coin. Then Daniels looked up. His eyes were moist now, but he didn't blink them away. "I was just getting gas," he said, simply. The younger agent nodded. "And you deserve to do that without being mocked." The weight in the air shifted again, this time not from authority but respect. The kind that comes not from rank, but from what that rank was earned by. In the distance, another engine rumbled. And it wasn't an SUV this time. The rumble grew into a roar. Across the dry Tennessee highway, a military convoy truck rolled into view. Big, squared, and solemn like a mobile fortress. Its matte green paint absorbed the morning sun, and its sheer presence made the Secret Service SUV look like a toy in comparison. The vehicle eased into the lot with surgical precision, all sharp turns and deliberate silence. When it stopped, the passenger side door opened, and out stepped a figure that made even the federal agents straighten their backs. General Clayton Harris. The silver stars on his collar gleamed like polished ice. He was tall, maybe 6'3", with broad shoulders, a rigid posture, and the quiet presence of someone who'd spent a lifetime making hard decisions. His uniform was immaculate. His expression? Not anger, not even solemnity, just gravity. As he walked toward the rusted truck, every step echoed like a command. Nick and Melissa stood frozen in place. Neither spoke. Neither could. It was like watching a statue come to life. When Harris reached the front of the old Chevy, he didn't hesitate. He extended a hand. "Staff Sergeant Daniels," he said, voice low, rich, and reverent. "It's been too long." Daniels, still seated, looked up. And for the first time that morning, something in his eyes softened. He took Harris's hand with both of his. "Didn't expect to see you here," he said quietly. "I wouldn't have missed this," Harris replied. "You might not want the recognition, but you've damn well earned it." Behind them, the gas station lot stood still. Even the leaves on the distant sycamore trees seemed to hush. The general turned to the deputies. His gaze, sharp as a saber's edge, swept over them like judgment rendered. "You see this man?" he asked, voice calm but crisp. "He doesn't wear a cape. He doesn't make speeches. But he's a walking chapter of this country's history." Nick's mouth worked, but no words came out. Melissa lowered her gaze, shame crawling up her neck like fire. "He's not just a veteran," Harris continued. "He's one of the few who did what had to be done when no one else could. He's the reason the flag still flies over your courthouse. He's the reason your badges mean anything." Daniels remained silent, the challenge coin still nestled in his palm like a relic. Harris looked at him again. "Sergeant Harold Daniels, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia. Missions that never officially happened. Places the textbooks forgot. But we didn't forget. I didn't forget. And your country never will." The wooden box was lifted once more. "On behalf of a grateful nation," Harris said, his voice adopting the cadence of command, "I want to recognize your sacrifice, your service, and the decades you've carried this without asking for anything in return." Daniels's hands trembled again as he accepted it, careful, reverent, like he was handling something sacred. Then came the moment that would be remembered for years in Millersville. Daniels looked up at Nick, not with judgment, with weariness. That quiet, bone-deep fatigue of a man who had carried too much for too long. "You don't have to understand what I did," Daniels said, "but you damn well better respect it." And Nick, cocky, flippant Nick, nodded. "I didn't know," he whispered. "God." "That's the problem," Harris said, without turning. "Too many people don't know, and worse, they don't ask." Melissa's eyes were glassy. Her fingers clenched the notepad she'd been holding, though the pen had long fallen away. From the diner across the street, an old man emerged and crossed the road slowly. He wore a Vietnam vet cap, his limp pronounced, his face unreadable. A woman at Pump 6 stepped out of her car, her stance unmistakably military, back straight, jaw set. Behind the bulletproof glass, the teenage cashier slowly took off his baseball cap and held it to his chest. One by one, they came, like pieces of history coming home. They came from everywhere. An older man in overalls with a cane and a purple heart patch sewn onto his chest pocket. A woman in a sun hat who looked like someone's grandmother, until you saw the faint scar tracing her jawline and the old army tattoo on her forearm. A mechanic from the shop down the street wiping his hands on a rag, his eyes fixed on the man in the truck with something close to reverence. They weren't tourists. They were veterans. They didn't speak loudly. They didn't need to. Their silence, their posture, the way they stood, shoulders squared, eyes forward, said enough. They formed a loose circle around Daniel's truck, like a makeshift honor guard. One man, weathered, silver-haired, eyes like worn stone, stepped forward. He pulled a frayed ribbon from his shirt pocket. 173rd Airborne, he said quietly, pressing it into Daniel's hand. "We didn't forget, brother, not one day." Daniels closed his fingers around the ribbon. His mouth moved, but no words came. A single tear rolled down his cheek. Then the woman in the sun hat stepped forward, unfolding something from her purse. A flag, worn, folded, crisp despite its age. "Carried this through 3 tours," she said. "Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria. I think it belongs with someone who truly understands what that means." Daniels reached out, his hands shaking visibly now. He held the flag like it might disappear if he blinked. "I don't deserve this," he whispered. "I was just doing my job." "Like hell you don't," said General Harris, his voice rising for the first time. "You earned it, every second of it." The circle around the truck thickened, some in uniform, some not. Some who hadn't worn a badge or medal in decades, but who still stood like soldiers. Melissa wiped her eyes, failing to hide the tears. She took a step forward, hesitating, then finally said, "Staff Sergeant, may I ask you something?" Daniels looked at her, still seated behind the wheel. "What would you want people to remember?" she asked softly. "About men like you, about veterans." Daniels looked down at the flag in his lap. He let the silence stretch. Then, his voice clear and quiet. "That we were ready. Wherever they sent us, whatever they asked, we were ready. And we didn't just carry gear, we carried each other. We carried the mission. We carried the hopes of people who'd never know our names." His words hung in the air like a benediction. And for once, no one tried to fill the silence. Not even Nick. The general turned to the 2 deputies. "What you witnessed today," he said, his voice like tempered steel, "isn't about rank or medals. It's about sacrifice. And if you walk away from this thinking it's just a story about an old man in a rusty truck, you've missed the point." Nick nodded slowly. "I won't forget," he said. "Not ever." "You better not," Harris replied, "because next time I may not be here to explain it to you." The truck's rust no longer looked like decay. It looked like armor. It looked like proof of something that had lasted longer than war, longer than... And finally, the man who'd once been invisible was seen. The moment stretched on like the still air before a summer storm. Then, as if on cue, the gathering began to shift. The veterans didn't salute. They didn't cheer or chant. They just nodded to each other, quiet affirmations, a language built not of words but of understanding, shared burdens, unspoken truths. Daniels looked around at the people standing in the sun beside him. His fingers still clutched the old ribbon, the flag folded tight across his lap. The challenge coin rested in his palm like a small weight, anchoring him to the moment. General Harris stepped forward once more and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You carried more than your share," he said gently, "but you're not carrying it alone anymore." Daniels nodded once. Then something beautiful happened. They started coming forward, one by one, quietly. The gas station attendant, barely out of high school, walked over, his cap in hand, revealing a small Marine Corps tattoo on his forearm. "My brother served," he said quietly. "He never talks about it, but I think he'd want me to say thank you." Daniels looked at him and offered the faintest smile. "Tell him welcome home." A mother and her son approached next. The boy clutched a plastic toy truck, eyes wide, unsure of what was happening, but sensing it mattered. The mother knelt beside him. "This is a hero," she whispered to the boy. "Say thank you." The boy looked up at Daniels and said, with all the innocent seriousness of a child, "Thank you for keeping us safe." Daniels swallowed hard. From across the lot, a man who'd been sipping coffee in a parked sedan stepped out and walked over slowly. "Name's Rick," he said. "Army, Gulf War. Never talked about it much, but I saw the coin, and I just wanted to shake your hand." Daniel shook it, firm, respectful, without needing to speak. By the time 10 minutes passed, there were more than 30 people gathered near pump number 4. The gas station lot had become something sacred, a place of memory, a moment of reckoning. Melissa stood near Nick, watching it unfold. Her voice was barely a whisper. All this, because of one man. Nick didn't answer right away. Then he said, "No," because someone finally noticed. The next day, the local paper ran a story. Just a small one, no flashy headline. Just a photo. The old Chevy truck, sun glinting off its hood, General Harris standing beside it with Staff Sergeant Daniels. Headline: "One truck, one salute." But it spread. Veteran forums reposted it. Church bulletins printed the story. A local high school history teacher shared it with his students, asking them to talk to their grandparents over the weekend, not for homework, but for perspective. And something started to change. Not but slowly, like spring breaking through a long winter. In the weeks that followed, something shifted in Millersville. No parades marched through Main Street, no politicians gave speeches, no television cameras showed up with breaking news. But change didn't always arrive with fanfare. Sometimes it crept in like morning fog, soft, slow, undeniable. At the sheriff's department, something unspoken passed between the deputies, a subtle recalibration. Veteran visitors who used to get curt glances or forced politeness were now greeted with firm handshakes and eye contact. A few officers even asked, quietly, "Where'd you serve?" Not out of obligation, but out of genuine curiosity. Nick Harlan changed more than most. He still wrote tickets, still ran his route, but the edge had softened. When he pulled over an older man in a beat-up Dodge to expired tags, he didn't reach for his citation pad right away. "Sir," he asked, "is there any reason this hasn't been updated? Something going on I should know about?" The man nodded and explained his VA appointments, his fixed income, and his intention to renew it next week. Nick gave a slow nod and led him off with a warning. The badge on his chest didn't feel like a shield anymore. It felt like a responsibility. Melissa Ray took a different route. She wrote an op-ed for the Millersville Chronicle. Not dramatic, not emotional, just honest. Title: "You Never Know Who You're Stopping." She described that morning at the gas station, not in detail and not for attention, but as a lesson in humility. She ended the piece with a line that echoed long after the article was read. "Respect isn't a courtesy, it's a debt, and most of us are overdue." The article was picked up online, quietly shared across veteran message boards and military networks. Emails came from Arizona, Michigan, Kentucky, even Okinawa. Letters addressed to that deputy from Tennessee. One simply read, "I didn't think anyone noticed us anymore. Thank you for noticing." At the local high school, history class felt different. Mr. Bridges, the U.S. history teacher, abandoned the textbook for a week and invited students to ask their families about military service. Stories surfaced like sunken ships pulled from memory. One student learned her grandfather had been a medic in Korea. Another found out his great-aunt was a nurse in Vietnam and had never spoken of it. Questions bloomed like spring wildflowers. Why does Grandpa always stand for the anthem, even when no one else does? What's a Bronze Star? What did it feel like coming home? Kids started bringing in patches, photos, flags. The town began to feel older and wiser. And the truck? It became something of a landmark. Not officially. There was no sign, no monument, no historical marker. But people knew. Locals nodded when they saw it parked outside the diner or rolling through town on a Sunday morning. Sometimes a stranger would approach it in the parking lot of the grocery store, hat in hand, just wanting to say thank you. Daniels never said much. He never had. But when someone reached out, quiet, respectful, earnest, he always looked them in the eye, shook their hand, and said, "Welcome home." Because respect wasn't about applause. It was about being seen. Every Sunday morning, Harold Daniels drove the same route. The Chevy still rattled. The brakes still groaned on sharp stops. The engine complained in the cold, but it always started. Always. The truck had outlived inspection cycles, resale value, and polite conversation. But for Daniels, it wasn't transportation. It was memory on wheels. He'd drive past the fields just outside Millersville, where the corn rose tall in summer and curled brown in winter. Past the weathered church where he'd been married 43 years ago to a woman who had understood his silence without ever needing to ask. Sometimes strangers flagged him down. Sometimes they asked about the truck. More often, they asked about him. A quiet thank you, a handshake, a story of a brother, father, friend who had served. A woman once stopped him just to say, "You remind me of someone I miss every day." Daniels always listened. Never much talking, just enough, because he knew the power of silence when paired with presence. One Sunday, outside the local VFW hall, a young man, barely 25, approached him. Fresh-cut hair, clean-shaven, tight jaw. "Sir," he began, his voice shaking with sincerity, "I heard about what happened here, about the way you handled those deputies, about the general coming, about what you did." He swallowed hard. "Thank you for showing us who we are, who we can be." Daniels shook his hand, firm and steady. "Welcome home, soldier," he said. "Coffee's on me." They sat together for an hour and didn't say much. But it was enough. That was the thing about respect. You couldn't demand it, couldn't buy it with medals or force it with noise. But once it was earned, truly earned, it stayed. It echoed in the spaces between people. It left a mark that no rust could erode. And that old truck? It rolled on. It carried lumber for neighbors, helped haul furniture for a widow moving to a smaller place. It even carried a flag-draped casket once, an old veteran with no family left to see him off. Daniels had insisted. "No one who served," he'd said, "goes alone." Now, when a police cruiser passed the truck on the road, the reaction was different. They didn't see a vehicle with expired plates or a violation waiting to be cited. They saw weight, and they saw worth. In a training classroom 3 counties over, every new police recruit was now handed a laminated card on the first day. 6 words printed in plain black type. You never know who you're stopping. It was part of a new lesson about judgment, about humility, about paying attention. The instructors didn't dramatize it. They didn't have to. They just told the story. A rusted truck, a gas station, and a man who'd served. Some recruits rolled their eyes at first, but by the end of the week, none did. Because the point wasn't the medals, it wasn't the titles, it was what those things stood for. It was about the weight people carried so others wouldn't have to. And Daniels? He never asked for the attention. He never wanted to be anyone's symbol. But as the years moved on, something inside him changed, just slightly. He didn't shy away from conversations anymore, not when someone approached with sincerity, especially not young vets, still raw from their own deployments, unsure of their place in the world. He'd sit with them at the diner, listen, nod, offer just enough. Once, a kid from the National Guard poured out more than an hour's worth of memory and doubt into a cup of coffee. When he was done, Daniels reached into his coat and pressed something into the boy's hand. It was a patch, frayed, faded, but clean. "I carried this through a few bad places," he said. "It reminded me who I was. Might help you, too." The kid tried to give it back. Daniels just shook his head. "Now it's yours." At the hardware store, a small display appeared near the checkout. Military patches, pins, folded notes of thanks. No one advertised it. People just brought things in, quietly, respectfully, the way things like that should be done. Back at the gas station, someone had repainted the graffiti on the wall. In place of scribbles, 3 words stood in block lettering: Home of the Brave. No one claimed responsibility. Daniels didn't ask. But he noticed. Because even if he didn't want the spotlight, he understood what it meant when the invisible became visible, when the forgotten were remembered, when a town, maybe even a country, looked past the surface and saw the soul beneath the scars. In the end, his story wasn't about medals or ceremonies. It was about the quiet power of respect, earned, given, and finally returned. And so, every morning, the old truck still rolled down Main Street, rust and all, carrying the memory of things people hadn't bothered to ask about,